So, this is part A of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions, KhoodeelaarTV television channel, being broadcast timed at 0750 hours GMT, 0850 hours British Standard Time on Thursday, the 2nd of November 2023. Of the issues that are absolutely vital by way of updates, contextual updates, the report on by a pub outlet called Inside Housing, giant landlord apologizes to family of resident who took his own life after and invisible people on the similar theme, the homelessness. There is no real, authentic, reliable source of information about homelessness in the United Kingdom. And I'll come to explaining the real reason for that in a minute. The homelessness, this is a piece that is on the Wikipedia website, and its first paragraph is homelessness or houselessness, also known as a state of being unhoused or unsheltered, is the condition of lacking stable, safe, and functional housing. The general category includes desperate situations, including living on the streets, also known as sleeping rough, primary homelessness, moving between temporary shelters, including houses of friends, family, and emergency accommodation, secondary homelessness, living in boarding houses without a private bathroom or security, obtenere, tertiary homelessness, having no permanent house or place to live safely. Internally displaced persons who leave their domicile because of civil conflict and are refugees within their country's borders. The legal status of homeless people varies from place to place. United States government homeless enumeration studies also include people who sleep in a public or private place which is not designed for use as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. Homelessness and poverty are interrelated. There is no methodological consensus on counting homeless people and identifying their needs. Therefore, in most cities, only estimated homeless population are known. In 2005, an estimated 100 million people worldwide were homeless, and as many as 1 billion people, 1 in 6.5 at the time, live as squatters, refugees, or in temporary shelters. United Nations definition. In 2004, the United Nations sector of Economic and Social Affairs defined a homeless household as those households without a shelter that would fall within the scope of living quarters due to a lack of a steady income. The affected people carry their few possessions with them, sleeping in the streets, in doorways, or on piers or in another space on a more or less random basis. In 2009, of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, Conference of European Statisticians, the group of experts on population and housing consensus, housing censuses, defined homelessness as, in its recommendations for the consensus, I'll read that again because this consensus is coming up instead of it should be the word census. In its recommendations for the censuses of population and housing, the CES identifies homeless people under two broad groups: primary homelessness or rooflessness. This category includes persons living in the streets without a shelter that would fall within the scope of living quarters. Secondary homelessness, this category may include persons with no place of usual residence who move frequently between various types of accommodations, including dwellings, shelters, and institutions for the homeless or other living quarters. The category includes persons living in private dwellings but reporting no usual address on their census form. The CES acknowledges that the above approach does not provide a full definition of the homeless. Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted 10 December 1946. I'll read that again. Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted 10th of December 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly, contains this text regarding housing and quality of living. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medicine. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well being of himself and of his family. Now, this is a definition that is leaving out individual people who are not members of a family. So, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well being of himself or and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. The ethos, typology of homelessness and housing exclusion was developed as a means of improving the understanding and measurement of homelessness in Europe and to provide a common language for transnational exchanges on homelessness. The ethos approach, ETHOS, appears to be an abbreviation for something which we shall come to shortly or later. Approach says homelessness is a process rather than a static phenomenon that affects many vulnerable households at different points in their lives. The typology was launched in 2005 and is used for different purposes as a framework for debate, for data collection purposes, policy purposes, monitoring purposes, and in the media. This typology is an open exercise that makes abstraction of existing legal definition in the EU member states. It exists in 25 language versions the translations being provided mainly by volunteer translations. Many countries and individuals do not consider housing as a human right. Former US President Jimmy Carter addressed this issue in a 2017 interview, saying, "A lot of people don't look at housing as a human right, but it is." His view contrasts with many Americans who do not believe housing is a basic human right. Other terms, and now looking at the United Kingdom, following the Peasants' Revolt, English constables were authorized under the 1383 English Poor Laws to collar vagabonds and force them to show support. If they could not, the penalty was gaol. This gaol. Vagabonds could be sentenced to the stocks for 3 days and nights. In 1530, whipping was added. The presumption was that vagabonds were unlicensed beggars. In 1547, a bill was passed that subjected vagrants, to more provisions of criminal law, namely 2 years servitude and branding with a V as the penalty for the first offense and death for the second. Many vagabonds were among the convicts transported to the American colonies in the 18th century. During the 16th century in England, the state first tried to give housing to vagabonds instead of punishing them by introducing brideswells to take vagrants and train them for a profession. During the 16th century in England, the state first tried to give housing to vagrants instead of punishing them by introducing bridewells to take vagrants and train them for a profession. In the 17th and 18th centuries, these were replaced by workhouses, but these were intended to discourage too much reliance on state help. So there is an end to that section, and there is a reversion to the USA situation. And then there is a discussion reference to Scotland, and there is the causes. Major reasons for homelessness include rent and eviction, economics, poverty, physical and mental health, discrimination, a history of experiencing domestic violence can also attribute to homelessness, should be contribute to homelessness, but the entry uses the word attribute. Human and natural disaster, foster care, etc. Now, in this discussion, there is nothing in the preamble nor in the body of the entry on Wikipedia of the context of the United Nations founding declarations and the basis of the various treaties and declarations that have subsequently been adopted and ratified by most member states. For example, the Refugee Convention and the current, and for the last few decades, the increasing numbers of migrants and refugees. Now, let's see how the Wikipedia is dealing with the migrants. The human migration is the movement of people from one place to another with intentions of settling permanently or temporarily at a new location, geographic, history, etc., etc. And the 1951 Refugee Convention. Let's take a look at this. The 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol are the key legal documents that form the basis of the UNHCR's work. They define the term refugee and outline their rights and the international standards of treatment for their protection. Refugees are among the most vulnerable people in the world. The 1951 Refugee Convention, supplemented by its 1967 Protocol, help protect them. And the core principles are stated in that paragraph. Let's say the core principle of the 1951 Convention is non-refoulement, which asserts that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. The document outlines the basic minimum standards for the treatment of refugees, including the right to housing, work, and education while displaced, so they can lead a dignified and independent life. It also defines the refugees' obligations to host countries and specifies certain categories of people, such as war criminals, who do not qualify for refugee status. In addition, it details the legal obligations of the states that are party to one or both of these instruments. View the download. Okay, so the history of the 1951 Convention and what is the difference between the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol? Which countries are party to the 1951 Convention and its 1967 Protocol? What is the definition of a refugee? Why do refugees need protection? What rights do refugees have under the 1951 Convention? Let's look at this one. Other rights contained in the 1951 Convention include quite a lot. The right not to be expelled, the right not to be punished, the right not to non discrimination, the right to decent work, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to freedom of religion, the right to access to justice, the right to movement within the territory, the right to be issued civil identity and travel documents, the right to social protection. And the first paragraph covering all of that reads the cornerstone of the 1951 is the principle of non refoulement contained in Article 33. According to this principle, a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. Now, in my broadcast on Channel 4 in January 1992, it was a broadcast that lasted about 3 minutes. I had written it and presented it on the spot, and it was about at that time the United Kingdom was represented by the Prime Minister John Major, and it was a day or so before John Major was due to go to the United Nations General Assembly and address the General Assembly because that year, 1992, January 1992, the session of the General Assembly was the turn of the United Kingdom to be presided by. And John Major was going to address the United Nations in the capacity ex officio of being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Now, in the run up to the visit or the travel to United Nations, John Major and his propaganda machine had released a number of statements about the United Nations and the cooperation and the relationship among the various member states. The thing that John Major highlighted in that propaganda lead up to his visit to the United Nations was the possibility of non nuclear powered countries acquiring nuclear power, nuclear weapons. Now, that was a legitimate issue of concern, and he was promoting the line that they should not be acquiring nuclear power or nuclear weapons. Against that background, I wrote that piece called The Slot. The slot was broadcast as part of the hour of Channel 4 News, so 1800 hours GMT to 1900 hours GMT, and the slot appeared at the last few minutes of the hour. So I wrote words to the effect that John Major was wrong because the main threat, the demographic threat that the Western countries faced, remember that was January 1992 when I was speaking, broadcasting on Channel 4, the real threat to their demographies of the Western countries would be posed by people desperate to leave their countries, forced to leave their own countries because of civil strife, poverty, and wars. So the reason or the reasons underlying those people leaving their home countries and becoming refugees and seeking asylum and refuges in the Western countries should be addressed by the countries like the United Kingdom instead of John Major leading the propaganda attack about nuclear weapons. And I said that if the causes of the desperate situation that I outlined were not addressed by real action by the states, then the societies in the West, including the United Kingdom, would be lumbered with and faced with unlimited numbers of people seeking asylum and refugees. Now, that was what I was saying on television, on Channel 4 news slot in January 1992. Now, January 1992, and this is now coming to 2004, January 2004, in 2 months' time. So that was 22 years ago. Sorry, 32 years ago. 32 years ago, and the 32 years, neither the United Kingdom nor the United States or any of the Western European countries has really looked at the refugee position, the migrant situation, which has got worse because 9 years after I made that broadcast, Tony Blair and George W. Bush created an additional emergency, additional millions of people became homeless, migrants, against due to no fault of their own. And that situation has got worse because of the increase in the number of wars created by the powers, including the United Kingdom and the United States. So, when the current interior minister in the United Kingdom, Suella Ivila Cruella Fernandez, has a go at the Palestinians, what should she be looking at? She should be looking at the solution to the problems that have been created in Palestine and other problems created in other parts of Asia and Africa by Western countries. The fact that the United Kingdom is not really pushing for ceasefire in Gaza at the present time is symptomatic of the negligent, uncaring, contributory kind of behavior role played by the United Kingdom and other Western countries. So there is a current resolution that has been passed by a large number of people, members of the large number of the member states of the United Nations General Assembly, calling for a ceasefire. And the United Kingdom is not really pushing for the ceasefire, nor is the United Kingdom opposition leadership, fronted by the political murderer of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer. So, where have we come after starting with the report about the man who committed suicide after the let's check on the name of this organization. So it's called the Clarion Housing Group. The Clarion Housing Group is the largest housing association in the United Kingdom with 125,000 properties across more than 170 local authorities. Clarion provides a home to over 350,000 people. Clarion is based in Southwark and was formed in 2016 as a merger of Affinity Sutton and Circle Housing Group. Clarion Housing Group comprises the group's housing association and sole landlords Clarion Housing, Charitable Foundation, Clarion Futures, and private development company Latima. Clarion Single Housing Association, Clarion Housing, launched in January 2018, is responsible for services to all of the group's residents, replacing the 10 housing associations that previously existed. Clarion experienced system issues on the 20th of June 2022. Clarion confirmed this as a cyber attack on their Facebook page on 23rd of June 2022, informing tenants to only contact them in an emergency and that emails cannot be responded to. They are, however, checking Facebook messages and direct messages on Twitter. It is unclear whether there has been a data breach of tenants' information, which would potentially include addresses, full names, contact information, and bank details. As a non-profit distributing housing association, Clarion is subject to the regulation of social housing's regulatory regime. The regulator of social housing sets standards that social landlords are expected to meet. The regulator focuses on economic regulation and will expect landlords to meet expectations on governance, financial viability, rent setting, and value for money. Now, this description of regulation leaves out the concept of care, which is the contextual focus for this particular reference, because the man who committed suicide didn't do that because of any economic reason or governance issues in the sense of financial viability, rent setting, and value for money. His very life was under threat, and he ended his life because he could not bear it anymore. So that is what the regulation failed. So going back to the actual context, the full context of the idea of society in England, in Britain, there is no real resort for people like that man to approach and be protected by. So if you look at the various references to various kind of existing bodies and so-called sources for help and support, you can exhaust the whole list that is available, publicly accessible, and you cannot find anything that protects people in situations like that man. So there is a lack of care among the providers and the owners of the businesses called the social housing or housing associations. And this is repeated. This is actually repeated by the behavior of the local councils. The local councils actually control the largest number of housing in any definition, in any description that is not solely privately owned. So, how many social housing stock? Social homes are the only type of housing where rents are linked to local incomes, making these the most affordable homes in most areas across the country. Rents for social homes are significantly lower than private rents. And there is an item by the shelter organization which has got what is social housing. The social homes have rents pegged to local incomes and provide a truly affordable, secure housing option for people across the country. Social housing is provided by either housing associations, not for profit organizations that own, let, and manage rented housing, or the local council. As a social tenant, you rent your home from the housing association or council, who act as the landlord. Social housing aims to be more affordable than private renting, provide a more secure long term tenancy. For social renters, this means better rights, more control over their homes, and the ability to put down roots. So these are the kind of short list of the benefits of social housing. The problems we are facing, it says that the right now we are facing a national housing emergency. Successive government, that is the United Kingdom government, have failed to provide the good quality, stable social housing people need, leaving millions shut out, and struggling to find a secure home. This is why we are campaigning to ensure the government invests in a new generation of social homes, demand more social housing, sign our petition. So get on the housing register, and this is the list of things that they say should be done. How to apply for a council or housing association home, how to move up the waiting list, apply for a larger home if you live in overcrowded housing, ask for a review of waiting list decisions, immigration and habitual con- residence conditions, how to get homeless help from the council. This is different to applying to the housing register, to be in the housing register. Now, all of these are, let's say, long trodden items, and they are not solutions to the housing crisis that they say they are facing, that is, shelter. And the reason why this is so goes back to hundreds of years of history. The housing idea of housing as a human right has not been accepted even now, despite the fact that there was a rare kind of comment by former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, in 2017, where he says that housing is a human right. He didn't elaborate in that quote, but essentially, there is no real regime, there is no real route to establishing housing as a human right in the United Kingdom at all. And despite the fact that there are all kinds of conventions, declarations, treaties that are derived from the founding aims of the United Nations and the human rights conventions, the actual extent, the full extent, the most of the human rights remits are still not realized or recognized, which is why homelessness is treated as a topic that enables people to express kind of concern, but really not commit to changing the status quo, which leaves millions of people homeless, millions of people's homes, housing, humanity, and human rights destroyed and denied. We shall be continuing on all of these in later editions. This is 38 minutes, I think, 30, coming up to 39 minutes at 08:23 GMT on Thursday, the 2nd of November 2023.